Let's take a look now at one of the latest polls. We have President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump basically neck and neck in the race to the White House. According to this new election forecast from 538, it shows that Biden has a slight edge, having a 53% chance of winning the election, and Donald Trump follows closely with a 47% chance. Obviously, a lot can happen between now and November 5. What do you make of the latest poll numbers?
Yeah, well, look, it's still 5 months away and, frankly, you and I are paying lots of attention to the race, but most Americans still probably aren't. So many things can happen, lots of black swans, lots of white swans. But look, I'd take a different view from that 538 poll. I think Donald Trump is pretty firmly ahead. What matters in the US system is the marginal states, the 6 or 7 states that really matter for the Electoral College. And most polls say that in those states, Donald Trump is well ahead. He's like 4 or 5 points ahead, which is pretty extraordinary, frankly. So you'd have to say that if things stay as they are, more or less, that Donald Trump will win at this stage. And it's not just the polls, it's also the betting markets. If you look at the real clear average of the major 8 bookies that take bets on the election, Donald Trump's something like 51% chance of winning and Joe Biden something like 40%. So the former president is actually well ahead. And that's pretty extraordinary. Who would have said that 1.5 years ago, right?
That's right. It is extraordinary, and obviously a lot can happen between now and then. So I wouldn't be putting my money anywhere just yet. But I suppose if I had to, I would be putting it behind Trump at the moment. Let's talk about his running mate. The New York Post is reporting that South Carolina Senator Tim Scott is unlikely to be chosen as Donald Trump's running mate. Why do you think that is, and who else could it be?
Well, look, Donald Trump said a few times that he's going to make the announcement in July, just before the Republican convention, and he'll probably do that. And in fact, he did that in 2020 with Mike Pence. He made the decision pretty close to the nomination then. Look, he likes keeping everyone guessing. Of course, there's a lot of speculation that it might be a woman. There's Congresswoman Elise Stefanik, who's very popular. There's South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem. But look, I think no one really knows at the moment who he's going to choose. I think he wants someone who's going to be very subservient and who's not going to overshadow him. But look, he's really keeping everyone guessing right now. But it is worth pointing out that the selection is extremely important because, he's turning 78, I think, in the next couple of weeks. And he's not going to have a third term. So whoever gets that nomination really has a good chance of running for the presidency on the Republican ticket in 2028. So it's a very important choice.
Absolutely. Let's look at RFK Jr. He could act as a disruptor in the presidential election, possibly taking votes from both sides. Have you been keeping an eye on RFK Jr.? What's your assessment of how his campaign's been going?
Yeah, certainly. Look, I have been actually. He's polling around 10 to 15%, which is pretty good actually for a third-party candidate. Of course, because of his very famous surname, he has a lot of brand recognition. He's the nephew of the former president. He's the son of the former Attorney General. So certainly most Americans associate him with the Democratic Party. But of course, he famously split from the party last year, and he decided to run on his own ticket. They wouldn't let him compete with Joe Biden. Look, personally, I'm surprised that he's not doing better because if you go to surveys, most Americans say they don't want Biden or Trump.
Yeah.
But like I said, he's still polling around 10-15%, which is good. The highest share that any third-party candidate has ever got is 19%. I think that was in 1992 with Ross Perot. So he's doing pretty well. But look, he's basically taking votes from both sides. He's an eclectic mix of left and right. He's very hard to pigeonhole. Look, there's still 5 months to go. He may get more votes as more Americans pay attention. But look, at this stage, I'd probably have to say that it's probably going to fizzle out. And that's kind of sad for me because if I was an American, I would vote for him. He's very sincere, he's educated, he's intelligent. He's really interested in the policy issues. But the US, it's just like Australia in a sense. The two major parties do not want third-party candidates and they try to make it very, very hard for them to get on the ballot. So he's currently on the ballot, I think, in something like 15 to 20 states. I mean, his campaign is emphatic that he's going to get on the ballot in all 50. But it's very, very hard because in each state you need to get hundreds of thousands of signatures and they all need to be verified and they all need to be sent to the state government and verified. And so he's done that, but it costs millions and millions of dollars, to have to have various campaign staff basically door knocking throughout states to get on the ballot. So it remains to be seen.
Do you think it's been hard for him to cut through to voters when there's been so much news around Joe Biden and so much news around Donald Trump?
Well, yes, it is hard to cut through. But like I said, the major TV networks here, the major newspapers don't really like RFK. I mean, he's often pigeonholed as a conspiracy theorist. I mean, especially when it comes to vaccines. I mean, he's quite famous for his opposition to COVID vaccines and actually to vaccines in general.
That could probably help him in some ways.
Well, that's right. I mean, if there's ever an election in US history where a third-party candidate would do well, frankly, it's this one, because you've just had the COVID pandemic and there's so much cynicism about government, there's so much cynicism about public health, and frankly, all the things he said through the pandemic have basically been proved right, that basically the virtues of these vaccines were exaggerated, and of course there were some injuries, we all know that now. So he's basically been proved right in many respects, but the mainstream media don't like him, and I think part of the reason is it's just so much easier to just have the tribal hatreds between right and left, between Republican and Democrat. That is much easier to cover, and frankly, as a journalist, it's a lot scarier to interview RFK because he's a lot more educated and well read than the other two. So you really have to do your research.
Well, there you go. Well, I love to hear that you're keeping an eye on him and we'll continue to watch what unfolds over the next few months. Let's finally talk about the big news in America today. The US Federal Reserve held its key interest rate steady and reduced its forecast from 3 rate cuts to just 1 for this year. Inflation has obviously been a big problem for America. What does today's decision, what impact will it really have?
Well, certainly for people who want to buy a house, it was probably disappointing because there was some expectation that there might be 2 or 3 rate cuts this year from the Federal Reserve, but that's probably not going to happen. They said most likely 1 cut. And that's actually relevant for Australia too, because the Reserve Bank of Australia obviously is heavily influenced by what the US does, by what the Federal Reserve does, and so it's probably less likely now that the RBA back home is going to cut this year as well. But look, I mean, the big question on the economy is the price level and inflation. And, since Joe Biden came to office, prices are up 19%, which is pretty extraordinary. I mean, if you had to single out one issue why Donald Trump, might be re-elected in November, it's definitely going to be prices. It's definitely going to be inflation. I mean, that's an enormous increase. If your wage is the same as it was in 2021, then your purchasing power has dropped by 20%, which is an extraordinary amount. And that actually hits the kitchen table. It hits, household finances. And it's not just, it's not just that. I mean, of course, interest rates for a new home loan in the US, 30-year home loan, which is the standard here, it's something like 7% now. It was 3.5% 4 years ago. So it's particularly bad for young people.
Yeah, absolutely. Adam Creighton, thank you so much for joining us on Power Hour. Great to speak with you.
Thanks.